This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez as we spend the rest of the hour looking at Mexico as former Defense Secretary General Salvador Cienfuegos has been indicted in New York on charges of money laundering and conspiracy to distribute drugs in the U.S. from 2015 to 2017. General Cienfuegos is accused of working with the Beltran-Leyva cartel to arrest and torture rivals in exchange for bribes. On Tuesday, a judge ordered Cienfuegos to be held in U.S. custody without bail, saying he is a flight risk. The judge also ordered the former defense secretary be sent to New York from Los Angeles, where he was arrested at L.A. International Airport last Thursday. Cienfuegos served as defense secretary from 2012 to 2018 under Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto. On Monday, the current Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, said he would ask the U.S. to share all information about ties between the former defense secretary and cartels. General Salvador Cienfuegos has long been accused of human rights abuses in Mexico, including refusing to allow investigators to interview soldiers who may have been involved in the 2014 disappearance and likely massacre of 43 students from a teacher's college in Ayotzinapa, Guerrero, Mexico. Cienfuegos also defended soldiers who were accused of massacring nearly 24 people in the town of Tlatlaya in the state of Mexico in 2014. For more, we're joined by two guests. Anabel Hernández is with us. She's been described as one of the most courageous journalists in Mexico. In 2010, she published the groundbreaking book Narcoland, The Mexican Drug Lords and Their Godfathers, linking top Mexican governmental officials to the world's most powerful drug cartels. She received so many death threats that the National Human Rights Commission in Mexico assigned her 2 full-time bodyguards. Despite the danger, she's continued to report. Her most recent book, Traitor, The Secret Diary of Mayo's son, about the son of one of the most powerful Mexican drug lords, Ismael Mayo Zambada. Also with us, John Gibler, author and independent journalist based in Mexico. His book on the 2014 attacks against the Ayotzinapa students is called I Couldn't Even Imagine That They Would Kill Us. He's the author of To Die in Mexico, Dispatches from Inside the Drug War, and more recently, Torn from the World, a guerrilla's escape from a secret prison in Mexico. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Anabel Hernández, we'll just say that you are somewhere in Europe right now. I mean, you face so much enormous personal threat for your work on exposing drug cartels in Mexico. Can you talk about the significance of the arrest of the former Defense Secretary of Mexico, Cienfuegos?
Good morning, Amy. Nice to hear you. Well, I really, what I can see is that the arrest of this general is not a case isolated. You have to see all the piece of all the picture. In this court was processed Joaquín Guzmán Loera, called El Chapo, one of the heads of the Sinaloa cartel in 2018, 2018. He was sentenced to life, imprisoned. Then this court, the same Attorney General's office, ordered the arrest of Genaro García Luna, another former Secretary of Security, Public Security in Mexico in the period of the government of Felipe Calderón. And now you have this third very important arrest of the general. So if you see the picture, you can see like a maximum process against the corruption and the penetration of the drug traffickers inside the government. That's what I see, a maximum process that haven't ended yet. I think that now that Richard Donoghue and Michael Robotti, the 2 attorney generals head on these 3 cases, has a bigger picture about really how penetrated was the Mexican government in the last 18 years by the cartels. What I revealed in my book in 2010, Narcoland, and you know the story, all the threats that I received because I revealed this, that now is in this court, in this historic moment.
Well, Anabel Hernandez, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned Genaro Garcia Luna, who
Yes.
not only was a top official under Felipe Calderón in terms of fighting drugs, but also was a top law enforcement official under the previous president, Vicente Fox. These are people who the United States drug authorities, enforcement authorities, worked closely with over the years. And what does it say about the ability of the United States in terms of dealing with combating drugs in Mexico, that these top officials worked closely with them, and now we're finding out they were a part of the problem?
For me, it's really a controversial question. For the U.S. government, of course, for the DEA, for the Department of Justice, they didn't understand that these people were working for the drug cartels. I mean, the story of Genaro Garcia Luna with the cartel, with the Sinaloa cartel, in complicity with the Sinaloa cartel and Los Beltrán Leiva brothers, and the complicity also of Cienfuegos. Cienfuegos just doesn't start to do this in between 2015 and 2017. He started to protect the Sinaloa cartel and the Beltrán Leiva brothers, according with documents that I have, according with formal depositions of members of these cartels in front of the Attorney General office in Mexico in 2010, in 2011. According with these depositions, General Cienfuegos was also protecting to Sinaloa cartel and Beltrán Leiva brothers since 2005, also the government of Vicente Fox, when Cienfuegos was the head of the army in that region in Guerrero, and then in Mexico City, when these two parts were absolutely under control of the Sinaloa cartel and Beltrán Leiva brothers. So yes, the question is, if I, as a journalist, were able to discover on time that these two men, head of the government, were involved with the cartels, what happened with the DEA? What happened with other agencies that works in Mexico? They didn't saw it? They let them work? What happened? I think it's a question that until now is not a clear answer.
Yeah, and I think we have John Gibler also on with us, an independent journalist. I'm wondering if you could talk about the role of former Defense Minister Salvador Cienfuegos in terms of the massacre of Ayotzinapa and his legacy there.
Of course. Hi, Amy, Juan, Anabel. I hope everyone's doing well. Everyone's listening to us as well. Salvador Cienfuegos was, of course, the Secretary of Defense during the Peña Nieto administration, 2012-2018, and as such was chief of the army and chief of the so-called drug war during those years when several major massacres happened across Mexico. You mentioned the murder of 22 people in Tlatlaya, Mexico State, at the hands of army soldiers, as well as the murder of 6 people and the forced disappearance of 43 students from Ayotzinapa in late September 2014. Salvador Cienfuegos, like the other high-level federal officials, initially dismissed the importance of those events, immediately dissuaded any analysis of state participation, of military participation in those events, but also much later when the family members of the disappeared first, and then second, the human rights organizations and the independent international experts that arrived in Mexico also to assist the families in the investigation, requested officially the ability to interview soldiers stationed in Iguala, Mexico, where most of the attacks took place on the night of September 26, 27, to just interview them about what happened, where they were, everything that happened that night. Salvador Cienfuegos himself, the head of the military, repeatedly refused to allow the families or their legal representatives and the independent experts access to the soldiers to interview them. Not only did he refuse that, but he went so far as to say that even talking to those soldiers would be criminalizing them. So now you have here a person who's being charged in New York of 3 counts of international drug trafficking and 1 count of money laundering, refusing to let parents desperately looking for their children forcibly disappeared by police in an operation carried out over hours a mile and a half away from a major military base, refusing to let them speak to the soldiers, just speak to them, saying that that in itself would criminalize the soldiers.
As we talk about the latest news, we're looking at Mexico, where last month authorities brought criminal charges against military soldiers for the first time in the ongoing investigation into the 2014 disappearance and likely massacre of 43 students from a teacher's college in Ayotzinapa, Guerrero, Mexico. Mexican officials announcing they had issued at least 25 arrest warrants against suspects believed to be the, quote, material and intellectual authors of the disappearance, including a former head of the federal police. Also, this past week, the former defense secretary of Mexico was arrested in Los Angeles airport. So we want to turn to families of the disappeared students who have long maintained the military was involved in the mass abduction. This is Clemente Rodriguez Moreno, the father of missing student Christian Alfonso Rodriguez.
The previous government, led by Peña Nieto, said, "My little soldiers are untouchable." Colonel Cienfuegos said it. "No one can touch my troops." With this new government, we've managed to enter the military barracks, the 27th military barracks in Iguala. With this government, we've managed to do something we couldn't before. For example, the arrest of police officers.
For more, we continue with our two guests, journalists John Gibler and Anabel Hernández. Anabel, if you could talk further about the human rights abuses in Mexico, the U.S. money that went into the so-called drug war, millions, if not billions of dollars, and not only the Ayotzinapa massacre of 2014, but as well another massacre that took place where 22 people were killed in the town of Tlatlaya in Mexico. And if you can relate this to the general who was just arrested.
Absolutely. As you remember, since the Plan Merida was signed between the U.S. government and Mexican government on 2008, 2009, the cooperation, the collaboration between the U.S. government and Mexico were stronger, supposedly against the cartels. Now you see that part of the government was part of the cartels, but that was the story that they told to us. Then, of course, the General Cienfuegos, as I told you, has been always inside this system. He was one member of one very strong group in the defense secretary. Then, when Enrique Peña Nieto decide that Salvador Cienfuegos be the defense secretary, all these politics, all these decisions about the war against drugs cross under the order of Cienfuegos. So he was a key part of this war against drugs in the government of Enrique Peña Nieto. So with the pretext of this war, fake, as we can see very clearly, the army abuse of their power. They disappear many people, hundreds of people in Mexico. Since all this part of the time, I mean, since 2008, from 2020, we have been seeing how the army participate in massacres, disappear people, abuses of power, abuse of human rights, and all these things. So, with the pretext of the war against drugs, in one place of Mexico called Estado de Mexico, on July of 2014, the army massacred, killed to 21 people, just like that. The official version was supposedly a combat between these supposed members of the cartel and the army, and all the members of the cartel were murdered. Just 2 days before the attack and disappearance of the students in Iguala, just 2 days before, the army, General Cienfuegos, have to confess, yes, we killed to that people. We're not a combat, we killed them. And start to be very, very uncomfortable for the government of Enrique Peña Nieto and for Cienfuegos in face this crime in Tlatlaya. Then what happened in Iguala, when these students were attacked by the federal police, by the army, by the local police, the government of Enrique Peña Nieto, instead of reveal the truth about the case, instead investigate to the army, to the members of the army that participate, they cover up the crime. They create a fake story about what really happened that night. And that's why this is one of the reasons why until now these parents cannot hug again to their boys, to their children.
I wanted to ask John Gibler. John, could you talk about what President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has done since coming in office? He promised there would be no more impunity with the military. Just last month, Mexican authorities issued dozens of arrest warrants for police and soldiers connected to the Ayotzinapa massacre or disappearances of the students. How has López Obrador dealt with this situation?
López Obrador made a very explicit commitment to the families. Actually, when he was still campaigning, the families confronted him during a campaign event in Iguala, Guerrero, and he made, at that point, a very explicit commitment to investigate the case, to find their children, to find the truth of what happened that night, and to do justice. And when he was elected, he reiterated his commitment. He formed a presidential commission to investigate the case. And then later, many months later, they named a special prosecutor who was someone who had actually worked with the independent experts earlier during the Peña Nieto administration, so someone who was intimately familiar with the details of the case. Since then, many of the family members have said to me that while they believe in the commitment that the president has made, they feel inevitably the anguish of how long it's taking. But the new government has issued arrest warrants for several federal officials, including Tomás de Lucio, who was the former police official supposedly in charge of investigating the attacks against the students, but who was one of the chief architects of the lie, the version that the government insisted on for several years, that the students had been confused for a rival cartel and taken out to this open-air outdoor trash dump near a town of Cocula and incinerated there during a rainstorm over the course of a single night. Of course, that story was based on confessions that were extracted through torture. Several videos of those torture sessions have since come out, so it's become absolutely impossible to sustain the veracity of those confessions. But one thing that is important, that the new government is very clearly distancing itself from this previous administration's cover-ups or acts of administrative forced disappearance of the students for so many years. And in fact, the president, López Obrador, I think for the first time explicitly said that the attacks against the students had been a crime of state. The president articulated what had been for years the call of the families and of protesters in the street, fue el Estado. It was the state. It was a crime of state.
And finally, we just have 30 seconds, John, but how would you relate the U.S. funding of the drug war to the mass migration of Mexicans into the United States?
Very quickly, I mean, I think the U.S. drug war has and always been a racist and neo-imperialist tool. It's never been about controlling substances that are dangerous for communities. And the arrest of Cienfuegos is just one more example of how the highest level federal officials in charge of supposedly policing the drug industry are the ones actually administering it. This goes back all the way to the 90s with General Jesus Gutierrez Rebollo, Noé Ramírez Mandujano in the Calderon administration, of course, Garcia Luna, and now Cienfuegos. The United States is obsessed with controlling and perpetuating this drug war, which wreaks terror on communities. Connecting it to migration, I was in the Central Valley of California. Migrants that are fleeing situations of terror that are provoked by the U.S. drug war.